The
Right.
biggest fusion of money that the world has ever seen happened in the last 2 years through printing of dollars.
Well, hello and welcome to CNN News 18's podcast, Clarity Amidst Clutter. This is your host, Ria Kundu, and we're back with another episode, another candid conversation about a rather trending subject right now, which is the mass layoffs that have been happening across companies. Well, no points for guessing that right now it is Twitter which is on the line. And yes, Twitter has been laying off people, especially after Elon Musk has taken over. And it has again announced that there will be another round of mass layoffs. And what he has described, or rather the reason that he has given for these layoffs, is the fact that he wants a workplace which is hardcore, right? So, discussing this, the anticipated recession, which people are also talking about, because Twitter isn't the only company which is doing this. We have other tech giants like Facebook, Baiju's, Amazon, and even Jeff Bezos has just hopped onto that same train right now, warning people of a recession. And joining me in this conversation is Mr. Ankur Warikoo, who definitely doesn't need that big an introduction because he's a very well-known motivational speaker, an entrepreneur, an educator, an online content creator, and now a best-selling author as well. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ria. Thank you for having me.
People were definitely expecting radical changes when Musk takes up Twitter. And when we talk about radical changes, they thought more on the lines of the experiments which he's doing right now with the subscriptions and the blue ticks. But what also seems to have come to the upfront right now is the kind of the way that he just moved in and sacked the entire senior management, along with people at the base level, the people who are the major workforce as well, where he had just sent out an email saying that if this is not the work style that you can cater to, that you can fulfill, then you will not be, you can leave the company and you will just be getting a severance pay. You do not need to continue in this company. Now, I am a person who started her career as well. A person who's on this side of the desk, what do you think goes on into their mind when this sort of a situation comes up? I would probably actually go ahead and push myself to work in that kind of an environment, that hardcore environment which he's spoken about, which has highly intense hours of people working. But is that something somebody's supposed to take in without, raising an issue about it? Or is it just like, you're young, you can just hustle it out?
It's a really good question, Shreya, and it's a great start to this conversation because it's a complicated question to answer. It's never a direct answer, and I believe it's a different answer for different people. I happened to read a very good Twitter thread on one of the individuals who was a senior member at Twitter, chose to not pursue the Twitter engagement after having worked at Twitter for several years. And the reason that they gave was very objective and rational. He said, look, everything set aside, whether I agree with Musk's execution and leadership style or not, whether I believe Twitter is the place to be and so on, what I see is I am going to be working a lot harder than I was and for very little upside, which still hasn't been elaborated as yet. And I'm at a stage in my life where I would love to spend time with my kids and my family. I'd love to spend time and have it for myself. So the balance of what I get as against what I have to give doesn't work out for me. And that, I believed, was a very honest admission of why they took the decision that they took. I would imagine this is not spreading a same brush against everyone at that age, but if you were young, and let's say you have the opportunity to continue at Twitter, whether in the capacity of engineering or product or design or whatever else, there will be a lot to learn in the next several quarters and years under Musk's leadership, because this will be an intensely different Twitter than what it was for the last decade or so.
This will be spoken about that X, the app X that he wants it to become, right?
Exactly, yeah. Right? The app that solves everything, which was his dream when he started PayPal of sorts. Right. And if you don't necessarily in your early tenure want to go after money, but instead focus on the growth, the learning, the exposure that you get, and perhaps the responsibility that comes with it, it may be a decision that you would want to take and say, you know what, I can give it another year or so and just see where it takes me. I may get to learn a lot, or I may just burn out, or perhaps figure that that's not for me and I opt out at that point of time. And this experience will still hold me in good state because I will find opportunities outside. And that's just true for everyone. So I believe that the answer is very different for people dependent on where they are in their life cycle.
Right. But while that's a very, very valid point that you've made, but given that we've just come out of a pandemic, right, where most of us were confined to our workplace, to our homes as our workplaces. So right after that sort of a situation where people are actually really getting accustomed to getting back to their offices again, in that kind of a situation, putting them in a place where you expect them to work for those many hours, like a high intensity workforce that he's described it to be, uh, do you think that would work out well for the employees? Wouldn't it cost them something more like a burnout situation? Even for people who are that young right now and who just started off, they have expectations. And for some reason, yes, definitely, a person who's right out of college, that person would definitely have higher aspirations and more levels of energy to go out there, hustle it out, yes. But people who are at a top level, at the senior level of the company, what about them? They have been working for a few decades right now, and they have that level of experience. And they have, yes, definitely, it will be a different Twitter for them as well. It will be a different experience for them as well. But how, I don't know, at a lack of a use of better word, how morally correct would that situation be for not just them, but even people out of college to just like, probably burden them or rather push them to a situation of burnout?
I don't think, and this is just my honest admission without knowing, of course, nearly as much detail as I should to make this answer. I don't think this is a choice that is being forced on people. It's a choice that people are being given to choose. I do recognize that the decision isn't an easy one to make, particularly because we're facing a possible recession. In fact, I'd argue we're already in recession in some way.
Right.
And the early signs are suggesting that that's going to happen. So getting rid of a job during this tenure could be quite stressful and quite anxiety inducing for a lot of people. But the choice still remains. Hey, this is what we're saying. We're being transparent about it. It's going to be hardcore in Musk's language. And if you want to sign up for it, great. I don't promise anything beyond that. But if you can't, we'll give you a 3-month severance, which is what we are supposed to legally. And you then have to find your own way. And as I said, there will be some people who will opt in. There'll be some people who will opt out. What Musk has also said, and this is specific to Twitter, not necessarily other companies as yet, is that Twitter is going to be largely an engineering and product focused company.
Right.
And I say this because I've run tech startups in the past and I consider myself of a technocrat. There is nothing more, Shreya, than an engineer going through the grind of building a product and making it work. No other experience comes close to that. So I'd argue, with all due respect to everyone's sanity, life, work-life balance, and so on, if an engineer goes through this grind for a year or 2 years at Twitter, they will learn what people learn in decades. It is guaranteed. Now, it will come naturally at an expense. And I recognize that expense. And that's why people have that choice. But this choice is not so much of, oh, lose your soul, sell it to me, become like a slave. It is all about, hey, this is undisputedly the biggest news platform that this world has right now. It can become a lot bigger, and you get the opportunity to build it almost all over again. And through that journey, you will learn what most people will not learn even in multiple decades. Do you want to sign up? And there will be some people who will say yes, some people no. But I do, and this is just me from an outside-in perspective, I do think that this decision is very easy to make for people who are outside of engineering, because it may be that, you know what, it's not worth signing up for. it's not worth signing up for if you're in sales, you're in marketing, you're in policy, you're in operations, because it will just be a lot more work, maybe not with the kind of learning that one expected. And you don't really know why you're doing it, because there are other places where you could do it and still have your own life to live.
So it's basically the do or die for an engineer at a corporate life. Like just log it off and you will get its results in a couple of years for sure. Maybe not as long as a decade, is what I'm gathering, right?
You will learn a lot.
Yes. So, well, now that you mention others, uh, definitely there are companies like Facebook, like I mentioned initially, Facebook, Byju's, they've also been doing this, they've been following the same trend right now, and they've all been announcing, even Disney for that matter. Disney hasn't yet announced a layoff, but they have definitely announced a hiring freeze. So discussing about the technicalities of it, you just mentioned that we are probably in recession already. Is that right? That's what you said, right? Right. So we're probably in recession already. Yes, of course, unemployment is a massive, massive consequence of a recession coming up. But there is still quite a lot of debate going on, especially in India, because India is looking forward to some level of economic growth in the next year, whereas the rest of the world has been talking about a possible recession in 2023. There was another particular situation that had happened with us that we had also faced back during the pandemic. There was a hiring freeze towards the beginning of the pandemic, and then towards the end, because there were so many slots that had opened up due to work from home and people didn't have to go to office. The companies had more capacity to hire people and they were all working from home. And now that they've all started going back to their offices, they probably don't have the resources to facilitate so many people. And now there's a hiring freeze. Would you agree with me on that?
No, there are multiple points at play here. Number one, technically, we're not in recession, because the technical definition of recession is that you are degrowing or you have negative growth as a GDP. And there isn't any major economy that has yet gone to that. We're certainly in a slowdown where we're slowing the growth that we were experiencing in the past. And the last 2 years, much against everyone's expectations, has seen the world go through a fairly big jump in growth, not GDP level, but definitely the stock market, which was at its peaks right after COVID struck. And the last 2 years saw absolutely unbelievable growth. And then the start of 2022 is when it started simmering. And now we're experiencing some sort of a correction, which may continue. Who's to say? The impact of all of this, Shreya, is people expected that COVID is going to be almost like a deathbed for the world. It's going to collapse. Everything's going to be out there dead. There isn't going to be any economic activity. There's going to be no consumer demand, no business demand. So you can literally just stop doing what you were doing. And that was true for a few months. March 2020 is when it struck. The market went into a 40-50% correction. It stayed there for a while. But then what began to happen is people started to consume in the vicinity of their household, whether it was consumption of content, it was consumption of energy, it was consumption of household items. The only things that were dramatically hit was transportation, tourism, leisure, but everything that was a survival mode or perhaps entertainment mode at home started to flourish. And it took a whole new turn, which people did not expect. And
like
then when the world...
side.
Exactly. And then when the world started opening up, people went back into the world with a vengeance. People started traveling a lot more than they were. People had saved up on their expenses because it nearly wasn't what it was. At least the strata of society, which was already well qualified and privileged and wasn't economically impacted by COVID.
There was a fear of missing out literally being manifested at that point.
Absolutely. Right. So you're looking at all travel series sitting at home, and there is this inbuilt FOMO that, oh my God, gets pent up. And the first excuse you have, you head to wherever you want. Right? And that's why Goa just went through the roof in India. And everyone was going to Goa for some reason.
Goa, and then you had Maldives as well.
Exactly. Like, so anything Goa that required a visa on arrival just became a hotspot.
Right.
So What companies went through was, oh my God, this turned so fast that we
Hmm.
have to plan for it. And
Hmm.
that's where capacity was built. That's where people were hired. And
Hmm.
also, that's when dollars were printed. The
Right.
biggest
Hmm.
fusion of money that the world has ever seen happened in the last 2 years through printing of dollars. And all of that liquidity then generated even more demand because that money eventually reached out to consumers in some shape and form. So there was
Right.
this flywheel that got connected, and people just added up capacities, added up, of course, all the human resources that they did. But
Hmm.
what also happened was this was all in some way not on stable ground because it was to peak and then come back to some sort of stability. Now, that
Right.
stability is happening, which is not that bad a phase, but because there was so much built for that peak, that
Hmm.
now when it's simmering down, the peak suddenly seems whack. We have a lot more people on our rolls than we were wanting to. We have a
Hmm.
lot more capacity and inventory lying in our
Hmm.
warehouses than we were supposed to sell. We suddenly have a lot more dollars parked into things that are still in motion and not yet seen the light of the consumer. So there is this massive capacity that has been built up. There
Built up.
isn't just enough time,
Hmm.
demand. And then two things happen in the world which added to this. The
Hmm.
Ukraine-Russia war, which added energy
Yes.
crisis because
Hmm.
Russia is a big source of European energy, and that's not
Hmm.
happening easily. And China lockdown because they took their COVID strategy to a whole new level, and suddenly supply of most raw material that the world needed, particularly technical raw material of semiconductors, ICs, they were stalled. And
Hmm.
that then escalated a whole new phase of just, I would say, uncertainty of sorts. So we are in
Right.
that stage where companies had built up and they were anticipating this demand to continue, but it's simmering.
Hmm.
There are
Hmm.
two global events that are leading to a crisis, and
Hmm.
there is this massive pileup of capacity and human resources that now is staring at a fixed cost. So what we're seeing as layoffs is basically the world going back to 2020. So if you look at the number of layoffs that have happened, they are very close to the additions that were made after
Me.
2020.
Right.
It's
Right.
not that they're going back 5 years, 3 years because the world has collapsed.
Hmm.
Basically saying, yeah, all the investments that we made after 2020 to cater to that high demand, because we don't have that demand anymore, we're taking it off. And that's what the
And
world
people
is.
were sitting and consuming as well. Like after that initial uh, period of panic that you were talking about, yes, definitely people were sitting back. And I think online, all these companies which cater to online services, those saw some of the most amounts of consumption being made. And definitely, and quite the recipe you definitely mentioned for what is happening right now, the layoffs. I would like to bring up one particular situation that really, really hit me during this time is the news that got circulated about this communication manager from Facebook who was rather on her maternity leave, and she got her notice period while she was in the maternity leave. And when she was uh, reached out to, and when she spoke to the media, she told them that she wasn't the only person who went through this entire process. There were others who were on their maternity leaves as well, and they were sacked off. Well, now it's not an unknown fact that this has been the trend. Yes, definitely it has changed now with time, but women initially definitely uh, 5 years back also would somewhat be seen as a liability. And I'm saying this as a woman myself who's working, liability to the company in the way okay, so she will, if she's joined right now, but she will have her family to look after a point. If it's a young person who's joined, that yes, she will get married, have a family, she will definitely have to take a maternity leave. So it's a lot more investment on the part of the company as well, like the kind of leave that she'll take or the kind of pay that they'll have to give her during that particular time. That is one situation. But now the world has like definitely changed. The trends have started changing. You'll see CEOs of various companies, like various companies being led by women across the globe for that matter. in such times, such an issue happening, I don't know whether it is just like whether I am bringing this up as a person who, like, who relates to the same gender, or rather it is a situation which you don't expect it, especially with where the world is headed, like people really really fighting for equality out there. But somewhere or the other, we see that these little incidents keep happening in between. Like, women are still considered, I wouldn't say a liability right now, but definitely a bigger investment than a man, for that matter, in these companies.
As a founder who has actually executed layoffs in the past, and I have been in that situation, what I can guarantee tell you is when layoffs happen at scale, it is a very dispassionate, non-emotional exercise where individual considerations are not brought in. And that is not to do with gender, it is to do with any other specific that the individual may very rightly so be experiencing that doesn't set them up to have a easier ride than others, but the organization is doing it at such a scale that it is impossible and thus not even desirable to get into such specifics. Is that the right thing to do or not? One can argue. Personally, I would always get into the specifics and try and do it, but I cannot place myself in the shoes of somebody who's executing layoffs to the tune of thousands of people in one go, and then going into individual details of how will that actually impact them or not. So what I can say with confidence from my side is, if people knew that this was the case with this lady, then it would not have happened. The Occam's razor approach, which is that usually the most obvious answer is the right answer, is that no one knew because no one was supposed to be looking. Everyone was just asked, hey, if you can bring down your team by X%, just do it and tell us.
As an entrepreneur yourself, as a founding member of a company yourself, do you think you would have taken this decision, or rather, if this issue was brought up to you that this is the situation of one of the people who got laid off in the process, how would you have approached it?
It's a really hard question, because if I, with all the right morality in me and the right values in me, do take this one incidence into consideration, and I should, every well-meaning individual will say yes to this, but you do not take into consideration every other such equally important context, you're being unfair to everyone else. And it's really hard then to get into the subjectivity of that matter. For example, what if there is a lady who's not pregnant? She is working, has been doing immensely well, but is going through a financial crisis. Her husband, if she has one, has been laid off from a job, and her salary is the only income stream to her family. She has EMIs to pay, the fees of her kids, support her entire family. Now, is that a more important or a lesser important issue than this particular lady's incident? Who's to say? Who's the judge here? It becomes
There's no criteria to make a judgment on that.
It
What
will
issue
never
is
be.
more important than the other? Definitely.
There will never be. And that's why, as I said in the beginning, it is important to recognize that when such dramatic, drastic cuts are made, they are made dispassionately. They are only and only economic driven, where every individual is merely a data point on an Excel sheet, not an individual. That is the harsh reality of it. And it's really hard to accept it, because you know of yourself as an individual, as a living being with the world around you. But the other side has thousands of you that go through that.
So in that situation, I mean, I'm sure the viewers out there would definitely want to know this as well, which is, what would your advice be, or rather a plan maybe for, yes, youngsters like me as well, or people who are there on the senior levels as well? How would you suggest that they prepare themselves for such a situation? Because I'll just give you one example here. this is not an example, or rather an answer to this question. Or so there was this incident that I had heard of. People got so done with the normal consulting, or rather the tech jobs, the big three, top four, all these companies. There were people who were getting out of that sector permanently, and they not only started joining startups but also started things of their own. And eventually, once they started working out, they started monetizing it. One such example was this person who used to work at PwC. At PwC, he started his own organic farm. That was during the COVID times. And there were more and more of such examples and cases that were coming up from that particular time. And I don't know, for some reason, I believe maybe if people were to continue that, they would rather have a backup plan at the end of this particular period, like after the recession, that yes, we all have backups. But I don't know how much that is going to work out, given that the economy itself is about to, like, it has already slowed down and it is about to go into a rather steeper slump after this. So in that particular case, what would your advice be? Should they start things of their own, or like you already mentioned that yes, hustling is definitely a way out there. You need to do it in your life to get there, to get that experience. But if there are people who probably don't think that they're made for that hustle, don't want to go ahead of it, go ahead with it, what do they do when they face such a situation, when they are bearing the brunt of it?
The first thing to recognize is the most important thing once you are possibly facing or are already facing a layoff or a situation thereof is to find financial security. Now, that financial security could already exist in the forms of your savings. It could already exist in the form of family support. Or if it doesn't exist, then to put yourself into a spot that will further put to risk your financial security may not be the wise thing to do. And that's why I often say, if you want to start your own thing because you want to make money, you are a fool, because you haven't then seen the data. The data very clearly says that you are far likelier to make a consistent stream of income working in a job than to become a founder, because the odds of your success as a founder are so dismally low, and then the odds of success are even lower, and then the odds of you making money through that success are even lower, that while there may be massive upside, which the media tom-toms and shows us that, oh my God, this billionaire has X billion dollars of net worth, and this billionaire had a secondary of these many millions, and so on. All of that is classic survivorship bias. You're only hearing stories of people who survived that war, but there are millions of people who have died whose stories you will never get to hear, because they will never make it to the page of any media publication. So please recognize—
it's always the victory songs which are sung, right?
Yes. Say that again.
It's always the victory songs which are sung, right?
Exactly. It is a victory song, and the victory song will, of course, herald all those ones who were victors, but they will never talk about the stories of the ones who potentially lost but gave it a fight. So the key is get financially secure. You have to have stability. I often say that that stability should be for at least 6 months, ideally 12 months. So whatever your expenses are per month, you should have an emergency fund of at least 6 and ideally 12 months, because then that gives you a cushion that makes you comfortable. If you have that and you think that you would want to go and explore or perhaps delve on a new idea, absolutely go ahead and do that. Because when else would you want to take that shot, but not now? There is nothing to lose. You're already, in some sense, the low of your lows, where you've been laid off from your job, or you believe that you will be in some sense, and you would want to give your dream and your aspiration and your ambition a shot. But if you don't have this emergency fund, you don't have this cushion, then please do whatever it takes for you to find that cushion first.
Right.
Do not ignore the importance of financial stability. It is a critical piece. It's morally and metaphorically really cool and amazing to see a Bollywood movie where the hero or the heroine has emerged from the shadows of a dark world and then fought their way through to become success.
Ideal life, basically.
Yeah,
Yes.
like it's brilliant. It's emerging from the ashes. You're like the phoenix. बहुत अच्छा लगा. And it may be true for you. No one's to say that you will not be that person. But
Right.
the odds of that happening are so low and against you that you really want to risk that out as yet. So that's the only thing.
Right. And I don't know whether this would be a correct claim to make, but yes, people nowadays have been in a rush to be there. And like they're always in a lookout for some shortcut, maybe like a shortcut to the emergency fund as well. And in fact, you will see this a lot. Like people have just been jumping jobs because they have this sense of we're not content with what we are doing. But I mean, yes, definitely, if you are working for something that you're content with, definitely that's a positive, that's a bonus rather. But you don't always end up, at least not in the very initial stages of your career, you don't always end up doing what you exactly love. You will need to hustle it out a bit till you get to the point that you love it. And then if it doesn't work out, definitely it makes sense for you to move into something else. But with that, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. And it was really, really enlightening. I'm sure all your Warikoos out there would love to hear you and would love to definitely take this discussion forward, because it is a very important problem that has been emerging out right now, and it will only get bigger from here, because from what I gather, this is just the beginning, and that is what all the big tech companies or even the entrepreneurs out there have been warning them about. And yes, definitely, this should be a warning sign. This should be taken seriously. And yes, for all you people out there, you heard him. Give it a shot. There is a lot to learn hustling it out in the initial years. And if not, then definitely you can take a second option out. There will always be an option out, despite the situation right now. And with that, we come to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much for joining. And this was CNN News 18's podcast, Clarity Amidst Clutter. And we had Ankur Warikoo with us. And this was your host, Riya Kundu. Till the next episode, see you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.